Well, then the feds would do the unthinkable. They would borrow money to pay the interest on money they already borrowed.
But my point is, legitimately, if the federal government had to pay 5% interest on $3 trillion, right, that's $1.5 trillion a year in interest payments versus $350 billion. That's about what, $1.2 trillion per year in additional expense. Now, compare that to the Build Back Better bill that they're talking about. They were saying that that was going to cost us $1.75 billion over 10 years. Now, of course, they're way off. But if you just believe their bad math, that's $1.75 billion over 10 years. 5% interest rates will cost $1.2 billion per year. That's 12 trillion over 10 years. That dwarfs the cost of Build Back Better. In fact, if interest rates go to 5%, given the current size of the national debt, we would be spending more on interest payments than we do on any other line item in the budget, which would include Social Security, national defense. I mean, maybe Medicare, which I think Medicare, Medicaid, all the health care programs combined would still be bigger than interest on the debt. But if interest rates went to 10%, then interest on the debt would dwarf what we pay on Medicare and Medicaid. In fact, I think it would exceed what we spend on Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and national defense all combined. That's at 10% interest. We were at 20%, right, in 1980 when we had a lot less debt than we have now. And we've got a much bigger inflation problem on our hands. But what that shows you is we can't do anything about it. The Fed has put itself into a situation where it can't actually fight inflation, because fighting inflation would destroy the bubble economy that they've been nurturing all these years, which is the reason I always said that, when the Fed was saying we want more inflation, I always said, be careful what you wish for. You just might get it, because the worst thing that could possibly have happened was a pickup in measured inflation, because the entire justification for keeping interest rates artificially low was the idea that we didn't have enough inflation. I mean, that's how crazy this was. The Federal Reserve said we don't have enough inflation. Prices are rising too slowly, and therefore the Fed has an obligation to make sure they rise more quickly, because somehow prices that don't rise fast enough represent some type of threat to the economy, which was complete nonsense. But that was the justification. But if inflation is clearly much, much higher than 2%, what is the justification for keeping interest rates at zero? What is the justification for trying to create any additional inflation when we already have too much?
None. One of the people behind all this, certainly behind the Build Back Better, Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, you just got in some sort of a public spat with her after she attacked Elon Musk for not paying enough taxes. What was that all about?
Well,
you let her have it, Peter. God bless you. I'm glad you haven't changed.
She works for the government, so she doesn't pay taxes. I mean, at least not on her senatorial salary. A lot of people that work for the government, they think they pay taxes because taxes are taken out of their pay. But they're not really paying taxes. They're just giving back to the government a portion of what the government gave them.
Gave to them, right.
So basically, the government could just reduce their salaries and pay them tax-free. It's the same thing. You see, when you or I pay taxes on our private incomes, we're giving the government money it didn't already have, right? So it's getting extra money. But the government gives money to its employees. And if it takes some of that money back, it's not really taxes. So the people who work for the government are tax takers. They're not taxpayers. They are living off of tax revenue. It's everybody who's in the private sector that is contributing the taxes that pay their salaries. So somebody like Elizabeth Warren shouldn't accuse anybody of being a freeloader, right? Because when you're living in a glass house, you're not supposed to throw stones.
So when you say print money, they don't literally print money. Don't they just add zeros to the bank accounts of their favorite bankers?
Yeah, they don't need a printing press anymore because most of the money is electronic. It's just an computer entry into a bank deposit. And so the federal government has an account at the Fed, and the Fed just adds numbers into that account, by pushing a button or whatever they have to do, stroke a key, but that's it. So you can create even more inflation because in the past, maybe you were at least constrained by the availability of paper and ink. But now I guess as long as they have an internet connection, they can keep creating inflation.
So the interest rates you're talking about is really the rent you pay to borrow money. Are those rents, those interest rates ever going to float so that it's determined by supply and demand? That is, unless you and Ron Paul become members of the Fed, without you and Ron Paul becoming members of the Fed.
Well, eventually it's going to have to happen because the government can only succeed in artificially suppressing them for so long. How long? Well, that's anybody's guess. I mean, they've already been able to succeed for a long time, longer than a lot of people, myself included, would have expected years and years ago when they really started the process. But there are many reasons that the Federal Reserve is artificially suppressing rates. And of course, this is doing severe damage to the U.S. economy. But the reason they're doing it is, number one, the Fed believes that high asset prices are key to economic growth. They believe in the wealth effect, even if it's phony wealth, just on paper. As long as we feel richer, the Fed is happier. And so the Fed wants to keep stock prices high, real estate prices high, to maintain that illusion of wealth. And politicians like to use the level of the stock market as some type of barometer of the efficacy of their policies. So they want to keep assets overpriced, and so they have to keep money cheap. But I think a bigger issue than that is a recognition of the degree of debt that exists throughout the economy. The federal government, state and local governments, corporations, individuals are loaded up with debt. Now, the reason they're loaded up with debt is because the Fed encouraged them to borrow by keeping rates so low. But now that they've taken on so much debt, they can't afford higher interest rates. It's like the Fed got everybody hooked on the drug of cheap money, and now it can't withdraw the drug without everybody going into withdrawal. And so in order to perpetuate this bubble that it created, it's keeping interest rates low. Imagine what would happen if the Federal Reserve allowed interest rates to return to a market level, wherever that level is. Now, we would know based on supply and demand, because prices are determined by supply and demand, absent government intervention. And so interest rates, the price of money, would be determined by the supply of savings in the economy versus how much demand there is on that savings, borrowing on the part of all the borrowers. Well, given that we have record amounts of borrowing and hardly any savings, the price of money should be pretty high to borrow. I mean, it shouldn't just be historically normal. It should be historically high, given the degree of borrowing we have relative to savings. But even if interest rates just went up to 5% from where they are now, which is basically zero, the government's national debt, which is about 30 trillion, it's financed at 1%, not even. But that's only about 300 or a little bit more. It's about 350 billion a year in interest that we're paying on that $30 trillion debt. I mean, 29, whatever it is. But what if interest rates moved up to 5% on average? And over the next few years, all of that debt reset at the higher rate.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
Do you want to know one thing about crypto? I made over 3,000% in profit in a few weeks. Fact is, the traditional financial system, the traditional money system makes you poor, not rich. If you want to earn $500,000, $1 million, you have to wait until you're 50, 60, 70 in the traditional financial system, and you probably will still be broke. And you will be old. This is not a sexy combination, as you can imagine. But the question is, how can you start in crypto and make these profits? Where to invest? Where to start? My name is Gunnar and I'm from Germany, as you can hear, and things are a little bit different in Germany. More about that later on. Fact is, there are lots of different cryptocurrencies. It's a gigantic universe where beginners and professionals get easily lost. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. There are 7 key steps you need to follow to become successful in this market. You have to know them, and if you fail one of them, it's literally impossible to succeed in this market. Just an example, one of the key points is your exchange, and one of the biggest are, for example, Binance and Coinbase. These are trusted and well-established exchanges, but, and this is a big but, you won't find the super profitable coins on those exchanges. The unknown super profitable coins that get gigantic profits are not traded on those kind of exchanges. They are traded on much smaller insider platforms that are barely known. And I can tell you what those super secret exchanges are and why they are so profitable. And another super important thing are the right information sources. The point is, the internet is gigantic. There are hundreds and hundreds of YouTube channels, blogs, pages, and much more. And there are also market makers and influencers. For example, Elon Musk, he is not a crypto guy, but the moment he recommended Dogecoin, it went through the roof, to the moon, so to say. But why did he recommend it? Where did he hear it from? He didn't hear it from newspapers. And believe me, he is listening to someone. But you have to know who, and you have to react before he is reacting. This is really, really important. And these are only 2 of the 7 steps you have to follow in order to be successful in crypto. And if you want to know all of these steps in much more detail, and if you want to have a comprehensive checklist, here's what you should do. There is a link below this video. Click on this link and you will get the opportunity to subscribe to my channel. Click on the link and you will see a video where I explain the next steps. So see you soon. Click on the link now. I'll see you there.